Selections from El Presidio Político en Cuba by José Martí. Translated by Esther Allen. Read by Alejandro Martinez. Preface. After 6 months of forced labor in the San Lazaro stone quarries of Havana, April 14th to October 13th, 1870, Martí was granted clemency and placed under house arrest on the Isle of Pines to await deportation to Spain. On January 15, 1871, he left for Spain. One of his first acts upon arriving was to publish this tract, addressed to the people of Spain, which had considerable impact in Spanish liberal circles and among Cuban exiles in Madrid. End of preface. Madrid, 1871. 1. Infinite pain should have been the only title of these pages. Infinite pain, for the pain of imprisonment is the harshest, most devastating pain, murdering the mind, searing the soul, leaving marks that will never be erased. It is born from a lump of iron, and quickly sweeps away this mysterious world that agitates every heart. It grows, feeding on every shadowy sorrow, and finally it overflows, swollen by scalding tears. Dante was never in prison. If Dante had felt the dark vaults of that life of torment plummeting down onto his mind, he would have ceased to paint his Inferno. Merely by copying them, he would have painted a better one. If a providential God existed and had seen this, he would have covered his face with one hand and flung this negation of himself into the abyss with the other. Yet God does exist in the idea of the good, which is present at the birth of every being, and leaves one pure tear in the soul thus incarnated. Goodness is God. That tear is the source of eternal feeling. God does exist, and I come in his name to shatter the cold glass that encloses that tear in the souls of Spaniards. God does exist, and if you send me from this place before I have torn away your cowardly and calamitous indifference, then give me leave to despise you, since I can hate no one. Give me leave to pity you in the name of my God. I will not hate you or curse you. If I were to hate anyone, I would hate myself for having hated. If my God were to curse, I would deny my God for having cursed. 3. Men wrapped in black cloaks came by night and met together on an enormous emerald floating in the sea. Gold, 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 they chanted in unison, then threw off their cloaks and recognized one another, gripping each other's bony hands and moving their cadaverous heads in greeting. Listen, said one. Despair is setting in below the hacienda's sugarcane. So many bones cover the earth that the grass cannot sprout. The battles are suns, shining so brightly that black skin is indistinguishable from white. I have seen from afar the ruin that advances terrible upon us. The demons of wrath have seized our cash-box, and I struggle, and all of you struggle, and the cash-box moves, and our arms grow tired, and our strength is drained, and the cash-box will be gone. But far away, very far, there are new arms, new forces. There, the chord of honor often resounds, and the name of the dismembered patria often exalts. If we go there, and the chord resounds, and the name exalts, then the cash-box stays. We will make servants of the despairing whites. Their dead bodies will fertilize the earth, while their living bodies dig and plow it, and Africa will give us wealth. Gold will fill our coffers. New arms are there. New forces are there. Let us go there. Let us go, said the men in cavernous voices, and then the first one sang, and the others sang with him. The country is ignorant and sleeps. The first to reach its door sings beauteous verses and inflames it. And, inflamed, the country clamors. Let us sing then. Our arms are tired, our strength is drained. New arms are there, new forces are there. Let us go there. And the men mingled their bodies together and transformed into a vapor of blood. They crossed through space, robed themselves in honor, reached the ear of the country that was sleeping, and sang. The noble fiber that lies in the souls of countries contracted vigorously, and the country clamored to the chords of the lyre that swayed within the red cloud, and in the intoxication of its clamor raised the cry of anathema. The country clamored unthinkingly. Even men who dream of a universal federation, of the free atom within the free molecule, and of respect for the independence of others as the basis for one's own strength and independence, denounce the petition of rights that was tendered, approve the persecution of the independence that was championed, and sanctified the heartless war of extermination as representative of peace and morality. They forgot themselves, and forgot this truth. Since remorse is inexplorable, countries, too, must expiate their sins. They begged yesterday and are still begging today for greater freedom for themselves, and on the very same day they applaud an unconditional war to crush another's petition for freedom. They did wrong. Spain cannot be free while it is stained with blood. A lusty, sonorous name echoed in your ears and engraved itself upon your minds: national integrity. And the vaulted roof of the National Assembly Hall echoed with the unanimous cry, integrity, integrity. Oh, it is not really so beautiful or so heroic, this dream of yours, for there can be no doubt that you are dreaming. Look at the image I shall paint for you, and if you do not shudder with fear at the wrong you have done, if, aghast, you do not curse the face of national integrity that I present you with, then I will turn my eyes in shame from this Spain that has no heart. 4. You, who had not a thought of justice in your minds, or a word of truth in your mouths, for the most painfully sacrificed, most cruelly trampled race on earth. You, who immolated some on the altar of seductive words, even as you were listening with pleasure to others who spoke of the simplest principles of right, the most common notions of sentiment. Moan for your honor, weep at the sacrifice, cover your foreheads with dust, and go on bare knees to collect the broken shards of your reputation that lie scattered across the earth. What have you been doing for so many years? What have you done? There was a time when the sun never set on your territories, and today hardly a ray of sunlight illuminates those that lie far from here, as if the sun itself were ashamed to cast its light on possessions of yours. Mexico, Peru, Chile, Venezuela, Bolivia, New Granada, the Antilles, all of them came in festive garments to kiss your feet, paving with gold the wide furrow that your ships made across the Atlantic. You put an end to each one's freedom. All were joined together to place one more sphere, one more world on your monarch's crown. Spain reminded the earth of Rome. Caesar had returned and had spread himself across your many shoulders with his thirst for glory and his delirious ambitions. The centuries passed, and the storm broke out at last, and it was as furious and inexorable in its unleashing upon you as it had been slow in the making. Venezuela, Bolivia, New Granada, Mexico, Peru, Chile, all bit your hand, which clutched the reins of their freedom, and opened deep wounds in it. And when your spirits were flagging, weak and battered, an "ay" escaped from your lips. One doleful blow after another was struck into the gash, and the head of Spanish dominion rolled across the American continent and traveled over its plains and marked its trackless mountains and forded its rivers to fall at last into an abyss, never to rise there again. The Antilles alone, Cuba above all, still dragged themselves to your feet and put their lips to your wounds and licked your hands, and tenderly, solicitously, fashioned a new head for your mutilated shoulders. And as Cuba was benevolently restoring your strength, you put your arm under hers and reached for her heart, and ripped it out and tore open the arteries of morality and science. And when she begged some miserable alms from you as a reward for her hardships, you stretched out your hand and showed her the shapeless mass of her trampled heart, and laughed and threw it in her face. And she felt the blood rise to her throat, and it choked her, and rose to her brain, and needed to burst forth, and concentrated in the strength it found in her breast, and made her whole body boil with the heat provoked by mockery and outrage. And it burst forth in the end. It burst forth because you yourselves caused it to, because your cruelty made the opening of her veins necessary, because you had crushed her heart many times, and she did not want you to crush it again. And if this was what you wanted, then why do you find it strange? And if it is a matter of honor for you to continue writing your colonial history on pages such as these, why do you not temper, with justice even, your supreme effort to affix the tattered remains of your conquistador's cloak to Cuba forever? 7. Martí, Martí, a poor friend of mine said to me one morning, a friend from back there, a political prisoner and a good man who, like me, was that day, under unusual circumstances, ordered to stay in the cigar factory and not go outside to work. Look, there's a little boy going by over there. I looked. Sad eyes are mine to have seen such sadness. It was true. He was a little boy. His full height barely reached a normal man's elbow. His eyes stared with a mixture of curiosity and fear at the coarse garments in which he had been clad, the strange chains that encircled his feet. My soul flew toward his soul. My eyes gazed into his eyes. I would have given my life for him. And my arm was tied to the factory table, while his arm was moving, terrorized by the club and the pumping of the tanks. Until then, I had understood everything. I had been able to explain it all to myself, even my own absurd case. But in the presence of that innocent face, that delicate form, and those serene, pure eyes, my mind went astray. I had lost my reason, for it had left me in horror to go and weep at the feet of God. My poor mind! And how many times has it been made to weep thus for others? The hours passed. Exhaustion was etched on that face. The little arms moved heavily. The soft pink of the cheeks disappeared. The life was going out of the eyes. The strength of those fragile limbs was draining away, and my poor heart wept. The hour finally came when the day's work was over. The child climbed the stairs, gasping for breath. He reached his ward. He threw himself to the floor, for the floor was the only seat we were given, the only rest for our weariness. The floor was our chair, our table, our bed, the handkerchief drenched with our tears, the bandage soaked with our blood, the longed-for refuge, the only asylum for our battered, lacerated flesh, our swollen, throbbing limbs. Quickly I was at his side. If I were capable of cursing and hating, I would have cursed and hated at that moment. I, too, sat on the floor. I lay his head down on his wretched little jacket, and waited for my agitation to permit me to speak. "How old are you?" I asked him. 12, senor." 12? And they brought you here? And what is your name?" "Lino Figueredo." "And what did you do?" "I don't know, senor. I was with Taitica and Mamita, and the soldiers came and took Taitica away, and then came back and took me away." "And your mother?" "They took her away." "And what happened to your father?" "They took him, and I know nothing about him now, senor. What could I have done to make them bring me here and not let me stay with Taitica and Mamita? If indignation, sorrow, and anguished pain could speak, I would have spoken to that unfortunate boy. But something strange, and every man of honor knows what it was, inspired me with resignation and sadness, and cooled the flames of vengeance and wrath. Something strange put its iron hand upon my heart, and wiped the tears from my eyelids, and made the words freeze on my lips. 12 years old. 12 years old. The words buzzed ceaselessly in my ears, and his mother and my mother, and his weakness and my powerlessness, all merged into one in my breast, and roared, and overwhelmed my head, and drowned my heart. 12 years old was Lino Figueredo, and the Spanish government sentenced him to 10 years of imprisonment. 12 years old was Lino Figueredo, and the Spanish government put him in chains, and threw him among criminals, and perhaps displayed him as a trophy in the streets. Oh, 12 years old. There is no moderate way to express it. What shame! There is no possible rationalization. What a vile blot! The government forgot its honor when it sentenced a 12-year-old boy to imprisonment, forgot it even more when it was cruel, inexorable, and wicked to him. And that government must turn back, and quickly, to reclaim that honor, which in this case once again, as in so many others, was soiled and disgraced. And it must turn back soon, horrified by its own handiwork, when it hears the whole series of events I do not name because the misery of others fills me with shame. Lino Figueredo had been sentenced to imprisonment. That was not enough. Lino Figueredo was already a prisoner. He was moaning, his feet bound by chains. He wore the black hat and the horrid uniform. But that was not enough. This 12-year-old boy had to be cast into the stone quarries, to be whipped there, to be beaten. And he was. Stones tore at his hands, clubs beat his back raw, quicklime scraped and opened sores on his feet. And that was the first day. And they pummeled him. And then another day. And they pummeled him again. And many more days. And a club ripped open the flesh of a 12-year-old boy in the prison of Havana, while here in Spain, the words national integrity strike a magical chord that never fails to resound, vibrant and powerful. There, national integrity dishonors, whips, and murders. Here, it moves and enthusses and exalts. It moves and enthusses and exalts the same national integrity that whips, that dishonors, that murders. The representatives of this country did not know the story of Lino Figueredo when they gave their approval to their government's actions, intoxicated by the heady aroma of an opportunistic patriotism. They did not know the story, for in it their country speaks, and if this country knew the story and deliberately spoke thus, then this country has neither dignity nor heart. And there is that, and much more. The stone quarries are the least of Lino Figueredo's martyrdom. There is more. One morning, Lino's neck could not hold his head up. His knees tottered. His arms fell limply from his shoulders. A strange malady was vanquishing the unknown spirit within him that had kept him, and so many others like him, and me, from dying. A greenish-black shadow surrounded his eyes. Red spots dotted his body. His voice emerged in a moan. His eyes gazed out in lamentation. And in that agony, in the struggle of sickness and prison, which is the most terrible of all struggles, the boy approached the officer in charge of his crew and said to him, "Señor, I am sick. I cannot go on. My body is covered with spots." Go on, the officer said harshly. "Go on." And he answered Lino's plaint with a blow from his club. "Go on." And Lino, leaning imperceptibly, for it had been noticed, his story would have had one bloody page more, on the shoulder of someone who is not as weak as he was that day, went on. Many things go on. Everything goes on. Eternal justice, as unfathomable as it is eternal, goes on as well, and one day it will stop. Lino went on. Lino worked. But in the end the spots covered his body. The shadow blinded his eyes. His knees buckled. Lino fell, and smallpox appeared at his feet and stretched its claws over him and wrapped him up, quick and greedy, in its awful cloak. Poor Lino. Only then, only because of the egotistical fear of contagion, did Lino go to the hospital. Prison is a real hell, a living hell. The prison hospital is another and even more real hell, on the threshold of unknown worlds. And to move us from one hell to the other, the political prison in Cuba requires that the shadow of death be upon us. I remember it with horror. When cholera was gathering up its sheaf of victims, the body of a Chinaman was not sent to the hospital until one of his countrymen cut into the ill-fated man's vein and a drop welled up, a drop of black, coagulated blood. Then, only then, was it established that the sufferer was sick. Only then. And minutes later that sufferer died. My hands have rubbed their rigid limbs. With my breath I have tried to resuscitate them. From my arms they have been taken, the poor cholera victims, unconscious, sightless, voiceless, who only then were acknowledged as such. Beautiful, beautiful is the dream of national integrity. Is it not truly beautiful, O you representatives of the nation? When I left that graveyard of living ghosts, Lino was still there. When I was shipped off to this land, Lino was still there. Since then, a tombstone has closed that immense corpse off from me. But Lino lives on in my memory, and clings to my hand, and embraces me tenderly, and hovers about me, and his image is never absent from my memory. When countries go astray, and from cowardice or indifference commit or excuse grave errors, when the last vestige of energy disappears, when the last, or perhaps the first, expression of political will remains awkwardly silent, then countries weep long, pay for their crimes, and perish, mocked, humiliated, and torn to shreds, as they themselves once mocked and humiliated and tore to shreds. No idea can ever justify an orgy of blood. No idea can ever excuse crime and barbaric refinement in crime. Spain speaks of its honor. Lino Figueiredo is there, and in my imagination's dreams I see the nation's representatives dancing, drunk with enthusiasm, eyes blindfolded, their movements dizzying, their momentum inexhaustible, illumined like Nero by human bodies tied to pillars and blazing like torches. Amid this sinister splendor, a red specter lets out a strident cackle. They dance. Dance now, dance. 8. Poor black Juan de Dios. He laughed when they put him in chains. He laughed when they put him to work at the pump. He laughed as he walked to the stone quarries. Only when the club was lacerating his shoulders, on which the sun's light had shone for more than 100 years, did he stop laughing. Idiocy had replaced reason within him. His intelligence had changed to instinct. Only his emotions lived on intact. His eyes preserved a faithful image of lands and things, but his memory randomly joined the latest with the earliest years of his life. In the long and strange tales he told me, which I greatly enjoyed hearing, what always stood out was his unlimited respect for gentlemen, and the trust and gratitude with which his masters rewarded his affection and loyalty. In 1 square yard, his finger could mark out the exact contours of the greatest haciendas in Port-au-Prince, but in 10 words he confused the great-grandson with the great-grandfather, and the fathers with the sons, and families of the most remote and separate regions. The only response he gave to that which most wounded him was the good-hearted, frank, full laugh that is particular to the Negro nation. Only blows awoke his former life in him. When the club smashed against his flesh, the eternal smile disappeared from his lips. The lightning of African wrath shone fleeting and fierce in his dimmed eyes, and his broad, wiry hand squeezed the tool of his labor with feverish agitation. The Spanish government has condemned a simpleton in Cuba. The Spanish government has condemned a black man more than 100 years old in Cuba. It has condemned him to prison. It has whipped him in prison. It looks on coldly as he labors in prison. 12. Look, look. Here comes the stone, an enormous mass. Many arms with military stripes on their sleeves are pushing it, and it rolls, and at each turn the desperate eyes of a mother shine out from its black roundness and disappear, and the men go on laughing and pushing, and the mass goes on rolling, and at each turn a body is crushed, and a shackle clanks, and a tear jumps up from the stone and lands on the necks of the men who laugh and push, and eyes glisten, and bones are broken, and the tears weigh heavy on the necks, and the mass rolls. Aye, when the mass has had done with its rolling, a body will be weighing on your heads, a body so cumbersome that you will never be able to lift it off. Never. In the name of compassion, in the name of honor, in the name of God, stop the mass. Stop it, or it will turn on you and drag you beneath its horrible weight. Stop it, for it is sowing many tears upon the earth, and the tears of martyrs rise in a vapor to the sky and condense, and if you do not stop it, the sky will plummet down upon you. The terrible cholera, the snowy head, the appalling smallpox, the wide black mouth, the mass of stone, and as the corpse stands out in the coffin, as white flesh stands out against a black tunic, all of it moved against a wide, dense, suffocating, reddish background. Blood, always blood. Oh, look, look. Spain cannot be free. Spain's head is still covered in blood. Now approve of the conduct of the Spanish government in Cuba. Now, fathers of the Patria, say in the Patria's name that you endorse the wickedest violation of morality and the most complete abandonment of all sense of justice. Say it, support it, approve it, if you can.